to host an in-person voting event this Saturday for people being held in custody. Officials say voter registration information will be made available at the jails this weekend as well. This is KUOW News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fidelity. With Fidelity Income Planning, Fidelity looks at how much clients saved, how much they'll need, and helps them build a plan for cash flow so they can go from saving to living. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC.
Welcome to Friday and welcome to Week in Review. I'm your host, Bill Radke, and I figure you probably haven't made the time to stay abreast of all the week's big local developments. So what I've done is successfully courted 3 local journalists to make you informed in just the space of an hour. I like that efficiency, and it's convivial as well when it's Seattle Times senior investigative reporter Patrick Malone with us. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And Puget Sound Business Journal tech reporter Alex Halverson. Welcome back, Alex.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for having me. Of
course. And freelance health journalist Joanne Silberner. Hi, Joanne.
Great to be here, Bill.
Great to have you here. And by the way, listeners, you can be viewers because you can stream this show on YouTube and Facebook. Okay, we're going to begin this week on politics. And Patrick, you've been following this the closest, so I'm gonna lean on you the most for a few minutes here. Our Seattle Congressmember Pramila Jayapal has been a major political success story. Advocated for immigrant groups here after the September 11th attacks, advised the city of Seattle, got elected to state legislature, and after just one term, got elected to Congress, first Indian American woman to serve in the House, co-chaired the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Now she's chair of that caucus, so she has great respect and influence. And this week, Jayapal's office sent a letter to President Biden, signed by 30 liberal House Democrats, asking him to change his strategy on Ukraine, to pursue direct negotiations with Russia, to look for a ceasefire. Well, this is not the official Democratic line. Biden's trying to keep up American support for the war effort, appear tough on Putin. He has said it's up to the Ukrainians to decide whether they want to negotiate with Russia. So, Patrick, this is about strategy. This is arguably about ethics, the right thing to do. It is definitely about politics. What should our listeners understand here?
Well, I think really the central question here is the letter. That's exactly the question that hasn't really been answered by Rep. Jayapal and other House Democrats who signed it. And it's truly an unforced error. First, the letter is completely tone deaf to the broad sentiment of opposition to Putin and his actions in Ukraine. It also sort of unprovoked put the Biden White House in a tricky spot by implying that it had somehow mishandled what is a very delicate international matter by not seeking direct negotiations with the Kremlin. And that's tricky in its own right because at this point it's largely a proxy war, and direct involvement of the US or NATO could really tip the balance on nuclear weapons, and that's a very real prospect. So another troublesome aspect of this whole saga is the competing information we're getting about its release. Jayapal said it was a staffer who released it without vetting from the top, but Politico, to the contrary, reported that Jayapal had authorized it. And that looks sort of scurrilous and deceptive. Not how a party clinging to narrow majority is facing an uphill battle in an ongoing election wants to be perceived, especially by undecided voters. So if there's any solace in the situation for Democrats, it's probably that overwhelmingly voters have had their minds made up in congressional races like this. So maybe won't change their vote. But for those up for grabs voters, particularly the ones that are highly engaged with the news, this could look like a splintered party that sometimes goes off half-cocked. And that could steer, some undecided voters that both parties are really pursuing in the Republican direction. And I don't believe a substantial number of voters are single issue Ukraine prioritizers, for instance, but this was an issue that Democrats had squarely owned, and they held the high ground, looking all the way back to former President Trump's actions to deny aid to Ukraine. But necessarily on an issue that I believe they were winning in terms of public sentiment. And for all those reasons, it was just stupid.
Yeah.
I think it could keep some voters home.
Why do you say that, Joanne?
I just think people are, if you are not interested in voting for her opponent and you may lose interest in voting for her, you might just say, and again, I take Patrick's point. I don't think that it's a voting issue, but I do worry about something that somebody in the Seattle Times said. I'm going to read this. They refer to the possibility, whether the question of whether is this unavoidably instinctual self-sabotage, and I wonder about that.
Something about the Democrats, they don't, they're not as unified.
Well, when they're looking good on something, something's got to come along and ruin it. So they're looking good on Ukraine, and then I don't know. What do you think, Patrick?
I think you nailed it, that nothing had to be said here. It would have been one of those times, just hold your tongue and lose. Instead, they felt compelled to insert themselves into this, and it clearly was done not on the same page with the White House.
Yeah, Patrick, will you cut your video just to see if that's going to help your audio, because it's breaking up a little bit. So let's try it. To say a little more about the politics, I'm no political expert, so feel free to disagree or add something here. But Democrats are trying to differentiate themselves from the Republicans. The Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, in the House, the minority leader, said recently that if Republicans retake the House, they might cut aid to Ukraine, which some people saw as a political gift to Democrats because they get to tar Republicans as being pro-Putin, just like Trump, soft on dictators. And instead, this call for ceasefire and negotiations might reinforce Republicans' stereotype of Democrats, and I think especially a Seattle Democrat, as being naive, do-gooder, left coast, peacenik, soft on crime, soft on Russia. Do I have that right?
Well, potentially. I do think that part of it was a compulsion to want to keep spotlighting this issue. The Democrats want to hold a neon sign over Ukraine because of how well they've been doing there. But this was an occasion where maybe they would have been better to keep their powder dry and let the Republicans, hang themselves with the rope that they've been given.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Ukraine isn't like other issues in this election. There's not really a clear culture war divide that Republicans or Democrats could be winning. So I think the Times had a quote that it was an unforced error. And I think that's really true, right? You could have just let the Republicans get really messy with their messaging over Ukraine and just sort of win this out. But now, like, the Democrats are the ones that look messy in this.
But sometimes we talk about what looks messy politically and forget about the substance of the policy. I just want to say that the idea of negotiation has cons, but it also has pros, right? There are a lot of Ukrainians who would rather negotiate with Russia now than spend the winter getting starved and frozen and bombed, and then maybe end up negotiating with Russia anyway from a weaker position than they're in now. Meanwhile, you've got, as Jayapal and the progressives pointed out, you've got the war raising food and gas prices for people who can't afford it, including in the US. You've got the danger of Russia using nuclear weapons. Even President Biden said this summer, there's probably going to have to be a negotiated settlement eventually. That may be old news. That was back in June. But just to talk about the wisdom or the substance of what the progressives proposed was not crazy, right?
Well, I think this in the Seattle Times article again, and Patrick, I'm not sure if that was your story or not. Somebody was quoted as saying that with foreign policy, timing is everything. When you bring this up is a really important issue. And maybe in the summer when the letter was first circulated for signature, it might have made some sense in that context. Now, a couple of weeks before the election, and it's probably not the right time.
And it also ignores, history beyond these last 6 months or a year, which says Putin's not going to sit and talk with us. Wouldn't do it over New START, which is far more significant, I think, globally than what's going on in Ukraine. And let's not forget that Biden, was part of a big rift that existed between the Obama administration and the Kremlin. And so, he doesn't have sort of the friendly, sort of conciliatory demeanor towards Russia that we saw sort of hat in hand and, meek little hello, Mr. Putin that we saw from Trump. So they can't talk about anything. And so to presume that they'd be able to sit down and negotiate something as simple as a ceasefire without maybe even giving up land in Ukraine that isn't really ours to cede, it just seems like from, national security and foreign policy perspective, just very ham-handed for a number of reasons.
Yeah, and then I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an important argument that ceding any, as you say, Biden has already said this is up to the Ukrainians if they want to negotiate with Russia, but ceding, it's been argued widely that ceding any territory here would just be rewarding Putin and encouraging him to keep conquering land and people. So that's catching you up on this controversy. I guess this week, Congresswoman Jayapal did clarify that, she said, we stand with Ukraine. Diplomacy is just one tool, and as Patrick alluded to, she took responsibility, kind of, but she also kind of didn't, because she blamed her staff and said that the letter was drafted months ago and released by her staff without vetting. So we'll see. I bet there's more to say about this. We'll find out. Anything? Do we cover it, team? Anything to add for now on that? Okay. So let's stay on politics, though, since we're here. My producer actually looked around and didn't see, and nor have I seen, local Republicans talking about Congressmember Jayapal and Ukraine. I haven't seen that it's a big issue. I do want to talk about any observations you have concerning some of these Washington state campaigns are getting national attention. You have the U.S. Senate campaign, the incumbent Patty Murray, and the challenger Tiffany Smiley. You have the 8th district, where the incumbent is a Democrat for now, Kim Schreier, against Matt Larkin. You've got the 3rd House district, where that incumbent's on her way out after voting to impeach Trump. So again, Patrick, I think you're paying the most of attention of any of us to this. I would like to ask what we've learned from watching these campaigns, but I don't know, since we don't know the vote outcome yet. Is it too early to say that we know anything yet?
Well, what we know so far is that Franco is still dead. This is very much the status quo.
That's a Saturday Night Live reference that I'm old enough to get. Yes, go on.
Right, 40-year-old ones,
Right.
To date us all. But this Senate contest is about as predictable a race as you're ever going to find from a standpoint of rhetoric. The incumbent Democrat stands on a record of bringing money to her district, fighting against abortion restrictions, and all the other GOP priorities that run counter to the sort of Democratic ideals, and frankly, a lot of the voters in her district. So Republican challenger then blames said incumbent Democrat for all the nation's ills, from crime to drug abuse. And we certainly don't have absolute clarity on a lot of Tiffany Smiley's positions, including whether she accepts the results of the 2020 presidential election, what sort of action she might take if elected on abortion access. I mean, she's deflected those questions and giving sort of whiplash answers, such as her personal pro-life stance, but that she would not support a national abortion ban. And frankly, it's pretty easy for a challenger to say these things because they don't have a voting record. And other Republican-aligned figures, such as Supreme Court nominees, have made similar pledges that weren't as easily kept when you get sort of swept up in the partisan control. So when it comes to that particular race, we haven't learned much beyond sort of the status quo platitudes you'd expect from either party. And I think it mirrors national races very much in that way. And it's probably why we're seeing a lot of incumbents, both Democrat and Republican, just avoid this whole conflict. It's a headache right now to run against a Trump propped up candidate, whether it's in a primary or a general. And so we saw a lot of retirements. And really with this, the same goes for the 8th district congressional race. We got Schreier and Larkin, where my colleague Jim Bruner described it as, clear contrast between them. But what that also means is pretty predictable answers from both parties. And very much like the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections, we may not really get the message about the significance of this race until after it passes. And in both of those elections, I believe we learned more about voters than we did about the candidates. And I'm eager to see, for instance, what in the 3rd district race between Trump-backed Republican Joe Kent and Democrat Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, what's that going to tell us about voters' preferences in that district? It's really a fascinating one from a national perspective, too, because That seat's occupied by Republican Jamie Herrera Butler, who, as you noted, challenged Trump when few other Republicans would. She bucked the status quo. And from the sounds of things, none of the other candidates in these races have that sort of independent streak. So their platforms have really been sort of pro forma.
Yeah, I would just interject here with a poll, and I think we're going to be talking a little bit about polling lately, but the Seattle Times and King 5, a couple of other places, did a preference poll. What is your number one voting issue? And abortion came out way ahead of any. 26% picked abortion, 22% picked inflation. And then things like election integrity, which you mentioned as an issue, only 5% is at their number one issue. And it'll be interesting to see if these races all get down to the number 2 and 3 and 4 issues. The climate change was only 7%. Inflation, well, I said inflation's 22%, but voting rights 4%, guns 3%. Some of these things which I used to think of as people's number one priorities just pale in comparison to abortion and inflation.
Yeah, I expected crime to come up higher. We certainly talk about that a lot. Border security, immigration.
Yeah, just way down there.
No.
Yeah, the ads make it seem like crime and border security are the top priorities. But like Joanne said, it's abortion in Washington, right? So for that reason, I don't know how interesting the Senate race, will be once the votes are tabulated. I know Smiley is narrowing the gap, I think, with each poll, but I can't see how she's going to eke it out over Murray. The one I'm really fascinated about is the 8th district. The 3rd district is very red. The reporting around it is fascinating, but it's just becoming increasingly red with every general election. But the 8th district, I covered the Washington GOP election party in 2018 when Kim Schreier beat out Dino Rossi for that spot. And there was some palpable deflation that night. The GOP had a decent night, as far as some initiatives around. Tim Eyman was very excited about one initiative they won. But the Schreier beating Rossi was kind of a blow. That district had always been red, and Schreier has been the first Democrat since inception. She's running a very center campaign, not even very center left, I would say. So like Patrick said, I think after the election, once the dust is settled, we'll kind of see how that messaging worked for them.
Only time will tell.
Yeah,
right.
In fact, there's a debate that's going to air tonight. We're doing this show live on Friday. I know it re-airs this weekend, but tonight, Friday night on KUOW, 7:00, you can hear Kim Schreier and Matt Larkin debate on KUOW. That's not my district, so I've already mailed in my ballot, but yeah, we'll see. Anything more to say about you brought up polls and trying to figure out what the people want. I'd like to toss in a poll that I saw. I think it was the same sort of a batch of the same poll that the Seattle Times published. They asked about Governor Inslee's idea of offering state workers $1,000 if they will get the new booster, the bivalent Omicron specific COVID-19 booster, and 57% of the people said they don't like the idea. And of course, that's a split between people who feel like we don't want to giving away taxpayer money and bonuses and sort of coercing people to get this booster, and other people saying who think it doesn't go far enough, and they say we should just mandate boosters. So I don't know, Joanne, you're the health reporter here. I can't tell, do Washingtonians want this booster or not, and how do they feel about the governor and the emergency orders expiring and all of it?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, I turned off this. Sometimes your phones don't turn off when you tell them to turn off. They have a mind of their own.
We'll talk about that. Alex, maybe you can tell us how that works a little bit later.
Well, that $1,000 doesn't go into effect until January 1st. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see, because most public health experts are predicting a really tough winter, a tridemic. You mentioned it before. We've got RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, that is. We've got the flu, and we've got this. So with that going on, it'll be interesting to see what happens when it comes through. But yeah, I think Washingtonians have pretty much checked out on being concerned. And I don't know about you folks, but when I walk around, it's like 2019. I've flown a couple of times with some trepidation and keeping my mask on, knowing that once you're on the plane and everyone's seated, it's not too bad. But boy, masking in the airport when I walked through was maybe about 10%. And this dropping of the mask mandates in some ways, I'm not sure how much it's going to change things. I think there's a whole lot of people who were supposed to be wearing masks. It's still going to be an effect for certain people in healthcare, some healthcare venues and nursing homes, places like that. But we're dropping that, and I'm not sure it's going to change much.
Yeah, the state of emergency orders end on Monday.
On Halloween.
on Halloween.
We're all going to get dressed up as COVID viruses.
Right, and mingle.
I think it's important, though, to also look at the full breadth of what relaxing these standards does, because there really are some practical benefits, such as non-urgent medical and dental procedures resuming, and the return to sort of pre-COVID standards for training and certification of employees at healthcare and long-term care facilities that have been kind of set aside to make sure there was sufficient staffing at these places at the height of the pandemic. But once again, it's the people who are most at risk of serious COVID cases who will be forced to adjust. With fewer and fewer of us masking and requirements for vaccinations trailing off, though not in Seattle or King County, which will, still expect employees to be vaccinated. It's those whose health makes COVID a dire prospect whose lives will be most affected, and probably not positively.
Yeah, and actually, I asked the governor's office about the poll, and they looked at it differently. They saw the number in there: 49% of people want state employees to be vaccinated, compared to 35% who don't want it. So they took that as sort of a good sign.
Want them to be vaccinated, or want there to be a vaccine mandate?
For state employees.
Yeah.
Well, they want state employees to be vaccinated. I'm not sure that the wording included mandate, but that people do. Nearly half of us want state employees to be vaccinated, evidently. So their feeling is that they're supported. I look at the same numbers you do and say, doesn't look that supportive to me.
Joanne Silberner is a freelance health journalist, and you're listening to Seattle Times senior investigative reporter Patrick Malone and Puget Sound Business Journal tech reporter Alex Halverson. Alex, you're on deck because our big tech companies who have looked so unstoppable have hit some rocks, and we're going to take a short break and pick up with that. So stay tuned. Don't go away. Keep watching if you want as we live stream the show on YouTube and Facebook. I'm Bill Radke, and we'll be back in a moment with more Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from Reframe Career and Leadership, helping mid-level professionals and women leaders find purpose in their career by KUOW comes from coaching workshops start in November. More at reframecareer.com.
Hey, my name's Claire McGrain, and I'm a producer for Seattle Now, KUOW's local news podcast. Every weekday morning at 6, our team of journalists and producers share the most impactful stories affecting our region, all in under 15 minutes. Learn something new and connect with our city by searching for Seattle Now wherever you get your podcasts.
Support for KUOW comes from Bedrooms and More. Celebrating their 50th year in Seattle, Bedrooms and More offers locally made mattresses, furniture, and bedding from natural and organic materials. Learn about their commitment to sustainability and available products at bedroomsandmore.com.
You are listening to KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke with freelance health journalist Joanne Silberner, with the Seattle Times Patrick Malone, and Puget Sound Business Journal tech reporter Alex Halverson. Alex, our local tech behemoths are looking more vulnerable lately and this week for sure. Will you tell us what's going on?
They have come back down to earth. They had an unfathomable boom during the pandemic. They were making money like crazy. They were spending like crazy. They're growing like crazy. They're still making a lot of money. The big ones around here, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, they all turned profits this quarter. But like Meta, their profit was half of what it was, a year ago. So from 9 billion down to 4 billion. Amazon turned kind of in like the low 2 billions, and Microsoft was around 17 billion, which was pretty good. But the revenues are much slower growing than they were a year ago, especially with cloud, which is a little worrying because that's just not as expensive as logistics and other divisions for these companies are. So what you're seeing is a lot of them are kind of looking around and they're just not able to spend like they were a little bit ago. And some of our reporting has shown that Microsoft is slowly moving out of Bellevue as it finishes its Redmond campus. Amazon is either putting the nix or scrapping or even delaying the openings of a lot of warehouses it planned over the past 2 years. There's a lot of belt tightening, even as, the raw numbers show they're making a lot of money still, but the investors are giving them much shorter leashes.
And who's losing jobs? Who's getting laid off first?
Microsoft is shaving off a few jobs here and there. I believe over at least 2 rounds over the past few months. They won't disclose full numbers.
Yeah.
Yes. So anecdotally, again, these companies aren't going to disclose, hey, we got rid of this team, right? But anecdotally, what you're seeing on LinkedIn, what you're hearing from sources is that it's a lot of, events teams or recruiters or marketing. It's not the engineers yet, right? The software development engineers, the cloud engineers. It's not those yet. I don't want to use the word like expendable or disposable, although I'm sure there is some accountant who sees it on an Excel sheet and thinks of these roles. But it's the ones they can shave off of teams here and there.
Alex, I thought I had read somewhere, and I couldn't find it this morning, that Microsoft was up 30% in terms of employees over the course of the pandemic. Is that possible that they were up that high?
Yeah, the growth has been, like I said, almost unfathomable for some of these companies. Even locally, Microsoft's passed 61,000 employees by our research. Before the pandemic, they were behind Boeing in the low 50,000s. Company-wide, they're, internationally and domestically, they're over 221,000 employees. Just a couple of years ago, they were in the 170,000. Amazon's the same way. Amazon's over 1.5 million employees company-wide. Before the pandemic, they were under 1 million. So the growth really has been crazy.
Well, then this is really almost like a minor correction to pre-COVID days.
It is, yeah, but the investors don't look at it that way, right? they want to see this growth go on forever. And again, I think the spending part comes into that equation as well. It's not just that they're not growing as much, as that they looked at their growth and they started spending a lot. I mean, I think Amazon is really going to have to look at the east side and say, okay, we got to really refine our strategy. These giant towers we're building in Bellevue, are they going to actually have people in them? So I think you're going to see more and more headlines about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Joanne. I wondered something similar, whether, Alex, is this the economy, interest rates, maybe a recession, everybody's pulling back? Or do you think there's something bigger, specific to tech? Because, for example, I would have thought that we're just getting more and more wired and remote and cloudy and, all that kind of stuff that's the business just systemically, globally. So is there something more I should understand about tech these days?
The big buzzword from the startups to the mid-sized companies to the bigger companies is we're strategic about our hiring and cutting jobs, right? A lot of that's fluff, but some of that's probably real, right? Hey, maybe we don't need a global events team. Maybe we can use some of that money to, get another cloud engineer. That's a totally unnuanced example of it, but I think that's where a lot of that strategy comes into, right? We don't need to open this warehouse. Let's add a few more to our cloud team. So again, they're not totally shutting down hiring. They're not totally getting rid of every job. They're being strategic. It's their buzzword.
Patrick, you noticed the layoffs at Zillow. I think it was 300 people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that one sort of, I saw it included as part of this trend, and it sort of posed a chicken or the egg question to me, rather than asking whether these, few hundred jobs lost will affect home prices. I'm curious whether the slight slowdown in home prices was actually the tail wagging this dog, which would go to Alex's point of some of these moves just being strategic in the moment. So I don't think it's cause for panic, but I do think that Seattle's tech-reliant economy is far more fragile than most people that I speak with realize, because there's almost this aura of permanence when you talk to longtime Seattle residents about housing and the tech economy and things. And I think that, no need to panic just yet, but let's be mindful of the fact that other industries have taken big hits at various times for a number of colliding economic reasons. And, to be mindful that this is something that we always ought to be watching, because as go the tech companies, so goes Seattle's economy.
And Boeing's having issues at the moment too. I mean, they just got that big Alaska Airlines buy, but they were having problems. And the same day they announced some other problems that could be serious.
Of course, one person's panic is another person's hope of being able to afford someplace to live.
Yeah, that's important
Right.
too, isn't it?
Well, since you did mention the parent of Facebook and Instagram, who employs a lot of people here, Meta, and Alex, this week a King County judge ordered Meta to pay $24.6 million for repeatedly, and I mean repeatedly, violating Washington State's campaign finance laws. The biggest campaign finance penalty anywhere in the country ever, according to the Washington Attorney General who sued them. So first, Alex, since Meta has a lot more than $24.6 million, does this matter?
Yes and no, right? Does it matter? Yeah, it's a big win for transparency. If you want to be an optimist, I think of this kind of as a gold standard for campaign transparency in the country. And the fact that the judge really didn't kowtow to, Meta in these filings was really arguing that they thought this law was ridiculous, that they shouldn't have to pay it, and that it was too burdensome for a tech company like them or Google, who had allegedly violated it in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a big deal in that Meta really, I think, thought they were going to win, or at least kind of get out from under this, and that the judge stood his ground and made him pay the full penalty and was kind of nitpicky about these violations. Those violations represent, Bill, if you went and you asked for information 10 times and they didn't give it to you any times, that's 10 violations. So it's not even like it's 822 people.
Sorry, but I didn't mean to talk.
Oh, you're good.
Maybe we should just let listeners know, remind listeners what this transparency law is. What is it that in Washington State these platforms are supposed to do that Meta refused to do? Yeah,
and Patrick, you might be able to supplement what I'm saying, but basically, if a platforms a political ad and you request information about it, they have to disclose it in a timely manner. Who paid for the ad, how many people are seeing the ad, which with a tech company is a lot more difficult than it was, 50 years ago when it was 5 TV channels. So it's a lot of financial information about these ads. And if you're going to be generous to Meta, so much of this is automated. Maybe they just weren't keeping track of this, but at the same time, tough. That's the law, right?
Are they following it now?
It's only a win for transparency if they're going to follow the law, right?
Yeah, this is true. When they were sued a couple of years ago and they settled, they said, okay, kind of took their ball and went home. They said, okay, we're not going to platform ads. But then they resumed. So as of right now, I actually don't know the status, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I personally think this is a really big deal from a, open government and transparency perspective, and not just the official action taken against Meta, but Meta's response to it. This wasn't just for forgetting to file a campaign finance form. As Alex's just outstanding reporting, I loved your coverage of this, Alex, and this is where I learned everything I know about it. So this encompasses 822 violations after already being sued by the AG for this behavior and settling, prior reporting lapses for nearly $250,000 in fines. So the prospect that this failure to disclose was deliberate also remains under review. And that's pretty important. It goes to their motive. Was this on purpose? And it might pass through a lot of people without much concern, but as someone whose sole professional purpose is informing the public about the forces motivating and manipulating their government's decisions, especially in an age of citizens united and growing clout around dark money, I think it's really, really gross. And on purpose or not, Facebook denied voting citizens in this state the right to know what outside interests were gaining favor with people in power. That's inexcusable from my perspective, especially when you consider that Facebook is a regular swimmer in the waters of political influence. They lobby, they're involved in campaign and issue committee donations, even independent expenditure. So that makes it an even bigger cause for concern.
Thanks for that. So finally, does this money, this $24.6 million settlement, does that, or penalty, does that money show up in Washington State's general fund budget? Like I was
It go-
note to other states, you can make millions of dollars by requiring rich tech companies to do things they have no intention of doing when they can afford to pay you off.
I forget the name of it, but it goes to a specific, basically transparency fund. Patrick, you might know the name of it, but it's a specific fund it goes to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything to add about where we are in tech? I guess Elon Musk is laying off, has just taken hold of Twitter and is laying people off. Do we have a bunch of Twitter employees in Seattle?
We've got a few. They kind of keep their operation here under wraps. Last I heard, I think it was a couple hundred, kind of standard to I think what Snapchat has in the area, but it's nowhere near what the outsiders like Meta or Google have.
Yeah. Okay. Well, those jobs might be at risk. Elon Musk,
maybe.
Watch. Okay. Well, then let's take another break. That's Alex Halverson from Puget Sound Business Journal. And we've got health reporter Joanne Silberner here. We've got Seattle Times investigative reporter Patrick Malone. We're going to take a short break. I went to the hardware store last night and bought 2 air filters, 20 by 20, same size as my box fan, so that in June or July or August or whatever, I won't be competing in a run on the store. But is that the best we can do around here? We'll talk about that, and I'll initiate my hyperbole watch, and we'll find something to smile about. And so good stuff on the other end of a short break on KUOW's Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from UW Medicine, celebrating the new Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, an independent organization that serves as UW Medicine's cancer program, bringing cancer care and research closer together to help benefit patients. More at uwmedicine.org/cancer.
I'm Julian Marshall, host of BBC News Hour. On today's programme, Elon Musk is the new boss of Twitter. Donald Trump's pleased, but is it a cause for more general rejoicing? And Ukraine's cultural heritage that President Putin wants to destroy.
Stay with us for BBC NewsHour this afternoon at 1 o'clock, right after Week in Review on 94.9 KUOW Seattle.
Support for KUOW comes from the Metropolitan Improvement District in partnership with the Downtown Seattle Association. Property owners within the Metropolitan Improvement District are focused on keeping downtown Seattle clean, safe, and welcoming 7 days a week. Learn more at downtownseattle.org/mid.
This is KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke, and I've got local journalists here from Puget Sound Business Journal, tech reporter Alex Halverson, Seattle Times senior investigative reporter Patrick Malone, freelance health journalist Joanne Silberner. You're listening to me at the least, and maybe you're watching us because we are streaming live at, Facebook and YouTube. You can come watch us. Just search for KUOW Public Radio. Okay, rain and snow in the Cascades this week. I have I'm still wearing my rain pants. It was wet and it was dark at the bus stop, and it feels like the Pacific Northwest again. And we've got wildfires are out or on their way out with some snow in the mountains. And as I was saying, I went to the hardware store last night and bought a couple of air filters in advance. Joanne, health reporter Joanne Silberner, is it just air filters and duct tape from here on out, or is local government changing any policies to reflect a possible new normal, smoky life in the Puget Sound area?
Well, this is no surprise to them. And, Jeff Duchin he's fond of saying that climate change.
Sorry, this is the King County public health director or whatever.
He's the medical officer for Seattle King County Public Health. Right. And he's been saying he calls climate change the single greatest threat to public health. So it's job one for him. They've been aware of this. They have places to go for people. They have They very cleverly, I think, repurposed some COVID relief funding to use for improving ventilation in some public places. They've upped their multi-language outreach efforts so that people who are non-English speakers will know what to do as well, know where there are places to go, both for breathing issues or during heat waves. They've started a training program for community leaders to teach them what to do with a box fan, which is basically get your box fan and your filter and tie them together and put them in the right orientation and try and pull in clean air or try and clean air as it comes in. So they're doing what they can. Really the bottom line that needs to be done is to stop the fires, stop climate change. And I think that's beyond their reach. The one thing bothersome when I was asking them, so what are you doing? I said, what was the toll of the recent smoke? I don't know about you. I had a hard time with it. But they don't have any health stats right now because there's a data sharing glitch. So getting the information from the hospital and collating it together. So they couldn't tell me how bad things were, but they did tell me, yeah, they know it. They're out there. They're trying to get things done. And for homeless people, that's been turned over to, what is it? The King County Regional Authority. I know it is KCRA. That's been turned over, and they have been they've been in charge of severe weather issues since the beginning of the year. They've alerted their service providers and outreach folks with what to do. What they have found is that homeless people prefer to shelter in place. They don't want to come in anywhere to get some clean air. So they've been working on ways to help them, and that's the heat is actually, they can give them water, and cold they can give them blankets. Smoke is a little harder. They've said that they've gotten a lot of support from the King County Library System and emergency management agencies to try and find places for people to go when you just can't get clean air outside. But it's kind of hard because a lot of people don't want to come in.
Well, you mentioned a lack of health data. The smoke is so arresting and and remarkable, and it falls heavily on people who are, have asthma, et cetera, are vulnerable, the very young, the very old, and yet not much on some other people. And so is it just a matter of time? They're collating this data, and eventually we're going to know. When are we going to know how dangerous? When we say smoke is dangerous, yet we go about our lives and we go outside, at least tons of people do, right? How are we going, and when are we going to find out how dangerous this is? Because I would think you would need data before local government is going to produce actions to, for example, there are areas that are more polluted than other areas, right? So it's a matter of equity. And so what do you see on the horizon here when it comes to action?
They know. I mean, you have increased emergency room visits for asthma. You have heart attack rates go up. All sorts of things go up in the short run. And of course, in the long run, there are problems continuing. They absolutely know. I mean, I want the data as a journalist. I want to be able to put a number. Well, they had this much of an increase in pediatric asthma visits, or they had this much of mental health can be affected too. There's that apocryphal feeling. And if you are high anxiety, this can really push up your anxiety. There's a whole slew of effects, and those are known. Quantifying them for any particular event does take immediate data, but they don't need this data as much as I want to have it, so that when I go around and ask people about it, I can say, hey, this is how big it is. But they know it's big. There's no question about this smoke. I mean, it's like when you consider it, you're right, you named it, people living in polluted areas, kids and adults with asthma, people over 65, people prone to heart attacks. Add these things together and it's a huge number.
So, for example, does this trigger the Clean Air Act? And so local governments would be required to take action that they're not taking yet?
Boy, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether it triggers the federal law requiring state or local action. I mean, certainly people who live in areas where there's not a lot of air, natural ventilation, they're up there. People who live anywhere where the smoke is coming in, we're all up there. So, but I don't know federally, but locally, I have to say, I don't know about you, but I certainly heard a lot of things on the radio about where to go and what to do. And I think that they're doing a pretty good job getting the word out that you need to do something. And I have to say, even if you're not feeling anything, there can be some damage done. Next time you go out for a run, tell me how in that smoke, tell me how it feels.
Okay, anything to add on the smoke situation?
Glad it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, glad it's gone. Yeah, nice to see. As I was mentioning, not only the wet but the dark that's making it feel more like home again, more like the Pacific Northwest. Which brings me to my next topic. Everybody needs a hobby. My hobby is noticing exaggeration because I see it in more than ever, social media, advertising, politics, just the way we talk and send emails around. We overstate things for effect, which is a good thing because it makes us less boring, and we can compel people and bring us to action. But sometimes I wonder whether we really mean what we say. So I'm going to give you just a small example from this week, and I want to know what you think. Multiple news media noted that as of this week, our sunsets now come before 6:00 p.m. And this was called gloomy. Seattle Times called it the big dark and said, starting this week, Seattle sunsets hit a grim landmark. So I ask you, autumn sunsets are grim. Is that slightly exaggerated, hyperbolic, or absolutely dead on?
I think that's hyperbolic.
Yeah?
I don't know. Grim. That's so grim. I don't know about grim.
Well, it's certainly not a surprise. If you're surprised, you just got here last year.
Right.
And if you're like me, which is, it's I don't want to use the word grim. Yes, it's getting darker earlier, but it's a relief. That's normal. There's so many changes to the environment and so many things going on that the sun is rising and setting at the right time. It's somewhat of a relief to me.
Gloomy is perfect, right? We're in Washington. We're subdued. Gloomy is a good word.
I'm going to have to agree with everyone. It's hyperbolic, even though it was my own paper. And I'm a fan of the gloom, right? It doesn't have to be a negative connotation. It's kind of cozy and, gives you time to catch up on all the streaming of your favorite shows that we missed. Well, it was sunny for 3 months. And, I guess gloom is in the eye of the beholder.
Actually, I should look that up. Gloom. I think gloom is literally true, right? Doesn't it go back to darkness? I think the word gloom has to do with darkness. It's different. It's different from I think we can agree on gloomy. Anyway, feel free to let me know what you think about all that, listeners. How are you feeling about the big dark? By the way, I would just note that Washington State passed permanent daylight saving time.
Yeah, what happened to that?
Congress isn't doing anything. Senator Patty Murray was a big campaigner for this in the Senate. She backed something hilariously named the Sunshine Protection Act. Speaking of hyperbole, speaking of overstatement. So yes, we have not made daylight saving time permanent. Meanwhile, Joanne, again, health reporter, I feel like I see more health reporters than not, more health experts than not, saying that daylight saving time isn't so good for us, that maybe standard time is better for us, but I don't know if you...
Well, it's the switch. It's not so much whether one is better than the other. It's the switch. It's only 1 hour, and you think that's not much, but it can affect people. I know that for the week afterwards, after the switch either way, even when we gain the hour, quote unquote, which kills me because it's the same amount as you pointed out, it's the same amount of sunlight, no matter how you cut it.
Yeah.
But the switch is tough. There are more accidents immediately after. Which way would there be more accidents? I guess there are more accidents in the spring. I can't one or the other. There are more traffic accidents, but there's also well-being issues that people feel a little bit disconcerted by the change.
Mm-hmm.
And it drives me crazy because especially here where we're going to school or work in the morning when it's dark and we're coming home when it's dark. What's the difference? How it shifts with those of us with fairly normal schedules, what's the difference with the shift? But even when it's a little bit broader, it's still either one or the other. You're going to have kids at the school bus, either, in the morning when it's dark, or if they're coming home late, a little later from school in the afternoon, it's getting dark. If they've got after school activities, it's the same amount of sunlight.
This is why I love talking to journalists, because you will lay things out for us. Here's how it looks like from this point of view. Here's how it looks like from this point of view, because many people will tell you that they know exactly whether daylight saving time or standard is the correct one. Just like people will tell you which kind of Halloween candy tastes awesome and which kind tastes horrible and deplorable.
No candy corn. No candy corn.
I disagree, but I don't need you to agree with me on candy corns. Okay, we're wrapping up here. We've got 3 minutes left in the show. I want to make time for anything that's making you smile. Did anything happen this week that seemed hopeful or pleasing in your eyes?
Yeah, the sun rose and set at the right time. It might come with gloom, but something is working on schedule the way it's supposed to, and is not affected by climate change, and is not affected by politicization of everything. It just is, and I found that a relief.
Yes, fall is here. I was walking through Belltown yesterday, and it was windy, and the leaves were stirring, and it was whipping all around me. It was wonderful.
A third vote for the beautiful, gloomy fall. It's for me, it was the rustle of leaves under our feet as I walked my kids to school this week in their sort of Book of Ween costumes, where they were getting, amped for this change in season. So, let's embrace it. Let's be cozy. Let's catch that chill air and that warm apple cider and all the fun that comes with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you do go out in the chill, some of us still hike here in the shoulder season and even the winter. And if you want to go out there and be warm in one spot, I saw that local cities and counties are dropping their burn bans thanks to the rain. So King, Pierce, and Homish counties lifting their outdoor burn ban, so you can get out there and it's not easy to start a fire in the rain. I'm not saying that it is, but if you can do it, you can enjoy it. Okay, let's wrap up the show. I've been talking on Week in Review with my local journalist guests, Joanne Silberner, freelance health journalist, Puget Sound Business Journal tech reporter Alex Halverson, and Seattle Times senior investigative reporter Patrick Malone. Thanks to you all. Now I know what happened this week, and I'm smarter because of it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for tuning in on Week in Review here on KUOW. And I got to thank our producer of the show, Kevin Kniestedt, and the social media aspect of the show, your ability to go on to Facebook and YouTube and watch the live stream. And it's just basically in general, follow us on social media. That's thanks to Tio Popescu and Juan Pablo Chiquiza. And it would sound like nothing if Bernard Wallet didn't use the faders just right and make everything sound great on the board as always. Again, we've got the live debate. If you're listening to us live, Friday night, 7:00, Kim Schreier, Matt Larkin. Tune in and have a great weekend. And we'll do this again next week on KUOW's Week in Review.